In my last few videos, I've been getting a lot of questions about these gray clampy things I use. So today we'll talk about them, talk about some good ones and bad ones, things you need to adjust on your workbench, and how to improve them a little bit. Now these gray clampy things really do have about as intelligent a name as gray clampy things. Firstly, they're called a holdfast in this country because they hold stuff quickly. And these things were the original clamp at most benches. You can see pictures on, back in the Egyptian age, the Roman age, of people using iron shaped just like this on workbenches. And they work in tandem with a workbench. Now this one right here is for 3/4 inch dog holes, but really traditionally they were an inch, inch and a half holes in your workbench because they made them out of cast iron, or they were forged by a blacksmith. And I'll get into a lot more of that later on. They work by acting like a spring. Now I have 3/4 inch dog holes in my workbench, and this holdfast is actually designed to work in 3/4 inch holes because it is ever so slightly smaller. See, it can rattle around. And what happens is you come over, you drop it down on your item, and then you give it a whack. And it cants it. It springs itself, so this is really tight. You're not moving this thing very easily. It's that sloppiness, that canting action that allows that spring to work. So you have your workbench and you cut a dog hole in it, and the holdfast that's going into it is a little bit smaller than the hole itself. It's actually a carefully measured amount smaller, and the bench needs to be a certain thickness for it all to work properly. See, when you drop it down in that hole, it kind of cants over, so it's now touching on this corner and that corner. And then when you pound it down, this right here springs out and locks everything together because it's now pinched between those two spots. Now, if it was more straight up and down where it fit in the hole just perfectly, the spring action wouldn't be able to bite into the wood. And that's why they need to work on a certain size workbench. If your workbench is too thin, then that canting action just has a face coming up too far forward, and the bending action is not going down, it's actually going the wrong direction. Now what you can do if you've got something like a Nicholson workbench, which is built by using 2x12s that are laid flat, so they're only about 1.5 inches thick, not quite enough, is you can glue down something like a 2x6 underneath it to double its thickness to about 3 inches, which is really pretty good. But if you do that one, I've had a lot of people I know that kind of just did a small board and they put glue all the way around it to make it work, and they get knocked off over time. Go ahead and glue down a long board so there's lots of glue adhesion over there so it can take the force, because these things are under a huge amount of pressure. The other problem people have is if their workbenches are too thick, which is the problem I had when I built mine, but I knew that ahead of time. And what you typically do then, the reason why it doesn't work is because it can't get enough pressure against these two corners. There's not enough angle there. So what you end up doing is you will counterbore it up until you get about 3 inches, 3.5 inches of thickness, and then start playing around with it. I know some people use them in 4-inch thick tabletops and they work just fine. But I found on my benches it is about 3.5 inches where it worked best. So you just kind of drill down a little bit at a time until you get comfortable with it. And then it will give that little bent hook enough room to get the proper angle. To remove the hook, you can do one of two things. You can counteract that kink by hitting the back of it, which is what most people do. Or you can hit it from underneath. Either way, but it's that fast to lock stuff down. That's why they're called holdfasts. Now, as I said earlier, holdfasts have been around since, the Roman and Egyptian age. We have pictures showing that. But in the 18th, 19th century, when Europeans started getting stuff like leg vices and other kind of vices that use screws and stuff like that, these somewhat fell out of favor. In fact, you know, in the early 20th century, you couldn't even find new made ones. You basically had to go to a blacksmith and have them custom made. And you could have found, you know, 10, 15 years ago, you could have found some Chinese made one where they were built for 3/4 inch holes that were cast. Stay away from those. Casting does not really work with a holdfast unless you're going to do a huge process and just make them monster size. Because when you cast stuff, iron has grain, and this bend right here is going to go against the grain. It's going to get thin grains apart, so they snap all the time. Me personally, small cast holdfasts, I would stay away from, even though they're cheap. If you go to a blacksmith, those are going to be some of the best ones out there, especially in this smaller size like I have on my workbench. Because the grain of the metal is actually consistent, because they fold it, so it can act as a spring. It'll work great. And you can get custom sized ones and even heavier ones. The more weight these things have, the better they are going to work. Now the ones you see me using are probably, you know, every now and then there's a unique product that comes out on the market where somebody just really does it well, just dominates. And Gramercy came out with these holdfasts, and they're the best thing I've come across. They're made out of a solid steel wire. That's why the grain is up there, and they can make them really inexpensively. I want to say you can get 2 of these for 40 bucks. I mean, that's just it's cheap when you start looking at handmade forged ones. I mean, it's just unreal, and they work great. But there are some things you can do to them. First thing, take off all that cosmetic oil that's on them, and then take some really coarse sandpaper and scratch it up sideways. Do not go up and down. That'll allow it to grit when it canks over quite a bit. Because it is canking it next against it and it's putting a lot of pressure on here. That's one of those theoretical issues, but in real life it's not that big a deal. Because once wood compresses, it does tend to get a little bit harder. My workbench is made out of poplar, one of the softest hardwood you can see. And look, all of them are slightly wallered out on these round corners, but you know, after long time of use, you can tell this is going to last a lifetime working in these same holes. And even if it does, just drill another hole. It's just a workbench. And these are useful for a lot more than just your workbench top. I know a lot of people that will put them in their offset of their leg vise right here as kind of an alternate vise for holding long stuff up, or just replacing their leg vise and using these. That's actually how a lot of them were used throughout history. It's an inexpensive vise. Just drop it in the leg, clamp it up, bang it through. There you go, you got your clamp. Or if you have a saw bench, something you can sit on, put a dog hole in your bench, use your bench hook, and it makes a great place to do your mortise and tenon joints, because you can do that sitting down, just banging away on it. It works incredibly well any place that you can use a dog hole the size required to make it work effectively. So, if you want a good way to hold down work, you want to speed up your work, you just need something that gives you lots and lots of alternative, I highly suggest you picking up a good holdfast. The ones I use are from Gramercy. Tools for working wood. For today's bonus, I want to talk about an institute for the crazy nut bars in the hand tool woodworking realm. But before we do that one, please, if you like this video, if you learned anything from it, like, favorite, subscribe, do all those social medias. All that stuff really does help me out, boost me up in the YouTube rankings, and maybe more people can learn from us. And if you've gotten a lot of benefit out of this series or any of my long-form videos, please consider visiting wortheffort.com, where I not only have additional information, I'll be producing a lot more articles there, that kind of stuff, but I also sell my own woodworking and different swag like t-shirts and hats and all that kind of stuff. It's at wortheffort.com. Now, the Disstonian Institute. Doesn't that sound like a loony bin? But if you are a hand tool fanatic or you're just getting into it and want to do a lot of research, this is a old school reference style website dealing strictly with Disstonian hand saws. probably the most prolific and well-made handsaws mass-produced out there. And it goes back to when Henry Diston started the company in 1840, the hiccups he had in the very beginning, and shows you all the details of why things were made a certain way. Different markets, different handle sizes, all the different variations of all the different handsaws. Now I'm about to make some more handsaws for myself, and it's become a great resource in Time Suck. I mean, you can just go down through the pages and look at all the little pictures and drawings and advertisements. I mean, it's fun for us crazy nut bars. Visit, I'll put a link down below to the Disstonian Institute.